Hello, I'm Nick Coffey, and this is the second installment of the creatures of the Cthulhu Mythos. I don't want to waste too much time here, so I'll just get right into it. The first entry is the offspring of everyone's fan favorite, Nyarlathotep. This creature is known as Uganak, or Uganach. Uganak is considered one of the abominations of the ancients, which is sort of a catch-all term for outer god-human hybrids. The creatures that will one day serve the outer god in question in a variety of ways. And the idea of outer gods trying to procreate with humans isn't really that unheard of. We've had other examples like the Dunwich Horror and Ihort's Brood, both of which I'll get to in a later episode. Now, Nyarlathotep is always trying to mess with humanity. He's just one of those gods who won't just leave us alone, and so he's always trying to impregnate women in our world through a ritual that's either needlessly complex or stunningly simple. As with so many creepy attempts at procreating with the outer gods, this one requires a woman. Now this may be a consenting cultist, but sometimes it's just not. The gods themselves and the cult scene at large don't really care about consent or anything like that, really. A pentacle is drawn on a wall, a pentacle being an upside-down pentagram, the kind that all the cool Wiccans wear. And then a copper metallic man emerges from it. Now depending on who you are, you might be thinking, oh, a copper man, that's not so bad. And depending on who you are, you'd be absolutely 100% wrong. The coitus that follows is turned into a nightmare of hellish proportions as the copper man begins to transform into a slimy, tentacled monstrosity. And not the good kind, the kind that smells abysmal and has an alarming number of mouths. Once the deed is done, this avatar immediately disappears, like some kind of embarrassed and fleet-footed frat boy escaping from the den of a woman of some kind. And much like one such frat boy, he leaves them pregnant. The gestation period isn't all too long though, as Uganak then violently burrows its way through its quote-unquote mother, after which it devours her to gain mass and strength. Uganak starts out life as a small, bronze-skinned creature with a reddish tentacle adorned with a disgusting maw where its head should be, only standing around 1.5 meters, and that's around 5 feet for you Americans out there. Now how large Uganak can become is pretty unknown, but it's speculated that it can grow several stories and gain immense mass, just like the Dunwich Horror. Spoiler warning for a 90-year-old story. On to the next entry is the Deep Ones. Now if you even have a passing interest in the Cthulhu Mythos, you probably know about the Deep Ones. They're fish-like semi-humanoids that serve their matron, Mother Hydra, and their patron, as well as Great Cthulhu under the sea in many cities across the world, although most think of the Devil's Reef when discussing Deep Ones. They're green-grayish in coloration, except for their bellies that carry a distinct white color, akin to many marine creatures that use this very pattern for camouflage. They appear slimy and scaly, with rigid spines across their backs, sometimes bipedal in motion, and sometimes resorting to quadrupedal motion, further blurring the lines between human and beast. They make shady deals with coastal societies, showering them with gold treasures in exchange for an icky thing known as hybridization. Through seemingly magical means, and means that require very little magic, aside from some Marvin Gaye, the citizens of these societies will undergo a metamorphosis and end up as Deep Ones. This metamorphosis is what causes the dreaded Innsmouth look, a term used to describe the pale, wide green heads and watery, almost lidless eyes of the people of Innsmouth. Why make this deal, and why undergo this transformation? The answer is simple really. Immortality. The Deep Ones aren't indestructible, but rather immortal in the sense that they never die of old age. Instead, they just get increasingly larger, as we've seen with the story Dagon by Lovecraft, in which an obelisk is found with engravings of what appears to be a Deep One taking on a whale. Now this Deep One might be Dagon himself, as Dagon might very well be nothing more than the largest and therefore strongest of the Deep Ones, but it might also be a random, albeit enormous Deep One. Do guns work on these guys? Yes, and if you're headed to Innsmouth, I'd suggest you come packing. Next up is the Defiler, Igolanak. It's not very clear how to pronounce any of these names, so if I pronounce any of these names in a way that you wouldn't, bear with me. Igolanak is a great old one, and the god of perversion. And this is not small-time human perversion. Oh no. Igolanak represents perversion which is unimaginable in nature and scale. This particular brand of perversion is simply too much for human existence and human brains to handle. His behavior is a little bit like that of Nyarlathotep, considering how he interacts with humans directly, even speaking directly to us and interfering with our business. As he's trapped between ancient and unknown ruins, he must manifest through a host body, a human host, and when he does so, he transforms the whole body into a nightmarish sight. The host becomes a grossly obese man, missing a head, with an awful mouth complete with gnashing teeth on each hand. When he is summoned, the summoner gets the honor of becoming one of his new priests, or eaten for pleasure. Call me crazy, but being a priest of the god of perversion doesn't sound that bad. It wouldn't be too crazy to assume that the concept of sexuality being sinful, specifically perversion being sinful, is derived from Igolanak himself. Ancient humans might have garnered an aversion to perversion in general because of Igolanak's meddling. Up next is the Flying Polyps. The Flying Polyps have always been an enigma to me. From the first time I read about them and to this day, I've had trouble understanding their purpose, even if there even is one. Maybe there's not. It's not as if regular polyps serve any good purpose to us. The Flying Polyps are somewhat intelligent creatures, and from the records kept by the great race of Yith, we should assume that they're somewhat capable, even dangerous. The Yithians seem to actually fear the polyps. Physically, they resemble floating nuggets of pulsating, uncomfortable flesh, adorned with awful eyes and mouths. And although it would appear that they float, they also leave relatively small, five-toed footprints beneath them. They also seem to have an innate control of wind and wind currents around them. This might explain how they float, as they lack any wings to speak of. Now, just how capable are the polyps? Well, when they arrived on Earth around 600 million years ago, they began constructing cities, much like the Shoggoth and their masters. These cities were comprised of tall, windowless basalt towers, and other very strange basalt structures. The lack of windows in these towers might suggest that although polyps need structure in cities, they don't have the needs that openable apertures might provide. See, we need windows because we need fresh air within our houses, or else we'll get sick, and of course because we enjoy a bit of sunlight now and again. The polyps might be immune from sickness, and they might not have an aversion to the sun, but perhaps indifference. So where are these cities? Trust me, you don't want to find them. The Yithians effectively defeated the polyps due to sheer technological superiority, and sealed them away within their own basalt cities, now functioning as a prison for the squishy bastards. Yep, they're still down there right now. Next up is one of my favorites, listener. If you follow Ministerium Miskatonic Radio, you might know that I've become keenly interested in little invertebrates, and the worms that walk are a part of the reason why. In fact, it's my theory that the world of the worms is wider and more complex than we could imagine. The worms that walk are odd beings, a clumped together amalgamation of worms in a vaguely humanoid shape, endowed with sentience and malevolence. They appear to have magical capabilities as well as beasts of burden, summoned by thin white flutes, presumably made from bones, which is just a little tiny bit ironic. With these flutes, they summon membranous monstrosities that defy logical explanation. Where do they come from? When a humanoid dabbles in the arcane arts, there accumulates a buildup of magical residue, otherwise known as residual energy. Upon death, one should make sure to cremate any sorcerer. If buried, the body will have an adverse effect on the worms and maggots that should feast upon it. The residual energy will then grant the worms immortal sentient life as a singular entity. The worms can be imbued with life of their own, while in some other cases the mind of a sorcerer may be carried on posthumously, resulting in an undead sorcerer. These sorcerers are known as larva mages, as the introduction of these creatures meant a restructuring of the qualification of undead, which in turn resulted in a catch-all term, larva undead. Worm mages, you might think. They don't sound too bad. However, the phenom can also be carried out on other individuals, like the larva assassins, formed from the body of a deceased killer for hire, or even a larva warrior, made from, you guessed it, the body of a warrior. This opens up new threats. Organized and mobilized worm cultures might actually prove to be a threat worthy of an army, or maybe some kind of doomsday weapon. But it's not like we have any of those at the Ministerium, of course. That's all for now. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. This wasn't exactly easy to make, and while the episode is still some weeks away, I've come to really like this format, and I hope to see you around next time. Have a good night, listener, and remember, there is always another nightmare waiting in the halls of Ministerium Miskatonic. Thank you.